A lot has changed in the last year, so it is time to once again jump into the wonderful console known as Dreamcast. The first thing you're going to need is Retroarch. If you don't already have it, head over to retroarch.com and click on the download tab. From here, scroll down to near the bottom and click on Nightly Builds. Now this tutorial is for Windows. I don't cover other systems currently, so if you try to follow along with these steps on a different platform and something doesn't work or it doesn't show up, I don't know what might be causing your trouble or if the core's even available, because again, this is just for Windows. Anyway, click on Windows, x86-64, scroll all the way down to the bottom and download the retroarch.7-zip. Now, for whatever reason you download this, get it extracted, and RetroArch won't run, go ahead and download this redistributable.7-zip, extract that, run that, and you should be good to go. Now that RetroArch is downloaded, go ahead and get it extracted. And after that's done, make sure you have your RetroArch folder where you want to keep it, because the first time you run RetroArch, it will default all of its directories into itself. So if you decide to move the folder later, it will be looking for those old directories and not work, and you'll have to delete your configuration file to start over again. Just a quick example here, we're going to load up RetroArch. So there we go, all the directories saved into itself. Now if I move it, it won't be able to find those directories, so what you're going to do is delete retroarch.config. And that's how you'd start over. But let's get into Dreamcast, shall we? Let's open up RetroArch. Press F on your keyboard to go into full screen mode. Now we're going to go to the online updater, core updater. Press up on your keyboard to get to the S's quicker and go to Sega, and we're going to download Sega Dreamcast / Naomi Flycast. So this tutorial specifically covers Dreamcast. I don't own any Naomi games, so I don't have a way of showing how to get that set up currently, but if you do have Naomi games, this core also works for them. But once that's downloaded, go ahead and press backspace twice on your keyboard to get back out to the main menu. And the great thing about Flycast now is that it has a high-level emulation BIOS added in, which means that right now you can actually load up a vast majority of your Dreamcast library, and they will be perfectly playable. So here we go. Here is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater running on Flycast with no BIOS in the system folder. This is the copy of Tony Hawk I ripped in a previous video where I showed you how to dump your own games and a Dreamcast BIOS. So if you'd like to check that out, you can click on the link in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. Now this HLE BIOS will be good for a majority of games, but there are some things that it will have hiccups with. There will be some games that won't run, there will be games that have graphical glitches, or there will be games that just stutter. Check out this opening cutscene for Resident Evil 2. Like, this does not work right. It shouldn't be choppy like this. It shouldn't be cutting in and out. It shouldn't have all these audio problems. It just doesn't work with the HLE BIOS. And the problems do persist into gameplay cutscenes. Now, once you get into gameplay, things seem to be okay, but I just can't deal with that stuttering cutscene stuff myself. If you can, more power to you. So what I honestly still recommend doing is having a Dreamcast BIOS dump on hand, just in case you encounter a problematic game in your personal libraries. I'm going to go ahead and press F on my keyboard to minimize RetroArch real quick. So you're going to need to dump your Dreamcast BIOS from your actual Dreamcast, or search online for the files if you want to do some Google foo. The video I posted earlier does show you how to dump it from your actual Dreamcast console. I'm going to try to see if that'll pop up here again. If not, just click the exclamation point in the upper right hand corner and you should see a link to that. I'll also have a link to that guide in the description below. But anyways, once you have sourced your Dreamcast BIOS files, go ahead and scroll up to your RetroArch system folder. And if you've already booted a Dreamcast game, there'll be this DC folder. If you haven't booted a Dreamcast game, you need to make this DC folder. You can just go new folder, type in DC, press enter, and it'll pop up. But go ahead and open that, and then you can just drag your Dreamcast files into it. They need to be named dc_flash.bin and dc_boot.bin. The best way to be sure that these files are being picked up accurately is to go back into Retroarch, and if you've loaded a Dreamcast game, it'll show up in your history file here. But then you could go to Show Desktop Menu, and your history file will already be selected, and it'll have your 2 Dreamcast games here that you played, well, for my example anyway. And now it is showing us that we have those files, Dreamcast BIOS, date, time, language file, so we're good to go. But now check out what happens when we load back into Resident Evil 2. Not only do we get the awesome Dreamcast BIOS animation, but now cutscenes also work. Yay! Yay, Capcom logo. The opening cutscene also works as well, so now you can fully enjoy Resident Evil 2 Dreamcast Edition without any issue. Well, as long as you have a processor that can run it. These Windows CE games are demanding, man. But now let's go over some controller options real quick, because there were a ton on Dreamcast. So for this example, I'm going to load into Quake 3. So by default, the Dreamcast uses a controller, and then you can set up your controls here just as you would on a real Dreamcast using the controller you have plugged in. By pressing F1 on your keyboard, you get into the Retroarch quick menu for your core. Now if we scroll down to controls down here near the bottom and press enter, we can actually change what is plugged into our emulated Dreamcast. So Dreamcast had a mouse and keyboard, so if we go into port 1 controls, we could change our controller type to a keyboard, and then we could change our port 2 controls to a mouse. Now if we press F1 again to get back into Quake, we can control these menus with our mouse. Unfortunately, by default, the keyboard doesn't work thanks to the frickin' hotkeys. So if playing Dreamcast games with a mouse and keyboard is something you're really looking forward to trying out, you will need to disable them. So if you press backspace to get out of your quick menu, it'll bring you back to the main menu of Retroarch. You could go down to settings, input, go down to hotkey binds, and then you can go ahead and just start deleting all of these. After those hotkey binds are deleted, you can press escape on your keyboard and it should load up your pause menu, where you can then choose your controls and set those up how you want. And there we go, now we're playing Quake 3 Arena Dreamcast Edition, mouse and keyboard. It's super sensitive, but you can fine-tune that as you play, and the experience is really awesome. But I'm just going to go over some of the other controller options that are available here with you real quick. So we have the keyboard and mouse. Then you can also choose light guns, which will map light gun controls to your mouse, and you can just shoot things on the screen using the mouse. Then there's also the twin stick, Saturn twin stick, and arcade stick support. So depending on the game you're playing, and if you have controllers that could be mapped to those controllers properly, you can select those and get a very authentic experience. Now the last thing I want to cover here real quick before I send you on your merry way to happily game is how to get 2-disc games working in Retroarch. When I rip my games, I like to use the GDI format because it is technically the most accurate dumping method. If you have ISOs or CDIs, they technically aren't going to be correct. There could be issues with them. But the problem with GDI discs is that it makes making multi-game disc playlists a lot harder. Going back into Resident Evil 2 here, we have Disc 1, so it has Disc 1 with all of its tracks and bins. And then Disc 2 is the same thing, and they're named exactly the same, so I can't just put those folders together and make a playlist out of the 2 GDI files. So the first option we can do is to rename these bins and raw files. So I'm just going to add a second number to each of these. And then I'm going to open up Notepad. And we're going to edit the GDI file and add those numbers into the GDI file as well so that the game still works. and then save it when you're done. So now I could take all of these files and put them in the same folder as disk 1. So now we have disk 1 and disk 2. And now I can make a new text file, name it Resident Evil 2. And then I'm going to open that up, and we're going to put in the name of the GDI files. Then we're going to save that, close it, and then we're going to rename the extension of this text file to M3U. And then click yes. So now when we go back into Retroarch, and we click on load content, we can scroll to that directory, and we can load the M3U file. So by default, it will load up into disk 1. So here we are again looking at Leon's disk of Resident Evil 2. But what if we want to play Claire's disc? If you have a controller plugged in that has a guide button, you can tap the guide button and it'll bring you back to the quick menu. If not, you will still need to have a quick menu button hotkey assigned from when we deleted them earlier, so you saw me put it back on F1. But once you're in the quick menu, go ahead and scroll down to disk control. So what we're going to do here is press eject disk. We're going to change the current disk index to Resident Evil 2 disk 2, or 1 or 2, and then you click insert disk. I do not know why my Dreamcast BIOS is in Japanese. That's awesome. Anyway, now we could just go ahead and load up the new disc, and now we're playing Claire. So that's one method of loading up your multi-disc Dreamcast games. It's not very easy, it's slightly complicated, and honestly not the way I recommend doing it, but it works. What I recommend doing instead is converting your GDI games to a single compressed file, which is the .chd format, or CHUD, I guess some people call it. There is a program out there called GDI to CHD, CHUD, and it will let you convert these folders into a single file. Now, I couldn't find a good download source for it anymore. The original source that I downloaded it from is gone, but I still had it on hand, so I went ahead and uploaded it to my Dreamcast folder in Dropbox here. So I will have a link to that in the description below if you want to pick this up. I put it under the Useful Apps folder, Dreamcast GDI to CHUD, then just go ahead and download it. Once that's downloaded, go ahead and get it extracted. Open it up, run the Dreamcast GDI to CHUD exe. Now it's going to ask for a source folder. So go ahead and navigate to where your Dreamcast games are, and then just choose the folder. So we're going to convert Shenmue into these single files. Then it's asking for an output folder. I'm going to put it back in the same Dreamcast folder, and then convert. And it'll pop up a thing over here that it's processing. There really isn't a status bar, so you just have to kind of wait for it. And the great thing is it names it according to what you have the folders named, so you don't have to worry about it being some weird name. And there we go, the conversion is complete. We have Shenmue Disc 1, and it is much smaller than its original GDI format here, which was 1.1 gigs. So now I'm just going to go ahead and do that for the other 3 discs. Now that the conversion process is complete, I'm just going to make a new folder here. Name it Shenmue. I'm going to put all of our compressed files into that one single folder. Now when I go in, I'm going to create a new text file. Name it Shenmue. Going to open it up. And we're going to put all of these file names into this text file. And then we're going to go ahead and save it. Close it, and then same thing as before, we're going to rename the extension .m3u. Just as a quick note, this program won't let you decompress these files, so if you still want to hold on to the GDI versions of your games for whatever reason, you will need to do so. You can't convert these back using this program. And of course you can use this on all of your Dreamcast games and not just multi-disc games. Also, quick note for CDI and ISO users, the playlist setup will be the same as the .chd format here. Anyway, we're going to go back into Retroarch now. And now we're going to load up that Shenmue playlist. Alright, so before we get started, I'm just going to go ahead and switch us over to disc 2. Nice, right? So now when I click on New Game, it should ask me to insert disc 1. So from here, you're going to once again press F1 on the keyboard, scroll down to Disk Control. You're going to press Eject Disk, press F1, then change to disc 1 and insert disc. And start the game on up. And that pretty much does it for getting Dreamcast games up and running. You have different control options at your disposal, and now you know how to do a couple of different ways for multi-disc games as well. So if that's all you were looking for, congratulations, you are done with this video. This one was a bit longer today, so thank you for sticking it out. Now, if you'd like to see more of the advanced setup of getting Retroarch playlists and some of the core options done, go ahead and stick around. We're going to dive into those now. So the first thing we're going to do is make a playlist because using that file browser sucks. So we're going to go to the desktop menu, press OK. And over here, we're going to right click, new playlist. We're going to type in Sega --space Dreamcast. Press enter, and that gives us a nice Sega Dreamcast playlist complete with icon. Click on that, and then over here, right click, click add files. And then scroll to where you have your Dreamcast games stored. So for me, I have them on the desktop for demonstration purposes. Now we're just going to go in. We're going to add the GDI file. We're using Flycast. Database is Dreamcast. Press OK. And now we're going to repeat that for all of our other GDI games. Now, if you have CDI, CHD, ISO files, you'll just select those instead of the GDI file. And for multi-disc games, we're going to go ahead and add in those M3U playlists that we made earlier. So M3U. And M3U. So there's all of the Dreamcast games I now had in that folder. They're all listed as a single entry instead of there being 4 for Shenmue and 2 for Resident Evil 2. Now, if you want to further pretty up this playlist, you can right-click over here on the Sega Dreamcast entry and tell it to download all thumbnails for the playlist. Now, your games do need to be named a specific way for this automatic downloader to work, which none of my Dreamcast games are. I do not have any of these named properly. So what I like to do in that case is head on over to GameFAQs. They have a nice media section here where users upload box arts for most games, and they're pretty decent quality. So I'm going to snag this US version of Dino Crisis. I'm going to save that to my desktop. And now I'm going to select Dino Crisis for my playlist here, and I'm just going to drag this thumbnail onto it, and there is my Dino Crisis box art. So now whenever I select Dino Crisis, the box art will pop up. So for any of your games that don't automatically download, you could try to rename them to get it to show up, which can suck. I don't like doing that method. Or you could just manually go ahead and put them in. Then to get this playlist to show up in Retroarch, you just have to close it down and start it back up. Now over on the left-hand side of the screen, there's going to be this awesome Dreamcast entry, complete with Dreamcast controller. It's going to show all of our games, and when you select one that has a box art, it'll show up over on the right. Nice, right? But now let's go over some of the core options available in Flycast. I went ahead and loaded back up into Shenmue here. So pressing F1 on the keyboard takes us to the quick menu, and we're going to scroll on down to options. Now, we're not going to go over every little option. We're just going to go over what I think a lot of people are going to use. So first up is internal resolution. This lets you play your Dreamcast games at a very high resolution if you choose to do so. Now, do note this will be very demanding on your hardware the higher up you get in these resolutions, and you can go all the way up to a staggering 12,800 by 9,600. I don't know if anyone actually runs that or not, but like that's nuts. So I have a 4K screen, so I've had success using 4K on my system. If you have a 1080p screen, you could go ahead and choose that. 1440p screen. And then after you choose your new resolution, you will need to restart the content, which I'm not going to do right now. Next up is screen orientation. If you have a monitor you can rotate, you can choose to change this to horizontal or vertical, depending if you're playing a shooter like Ikaruga. Alpha sorting, this one's important, and it's why I loaded up Shenmue here. So by default, it's on per triangle. But check out Ryu's eyes here. Check out his eyes. You can see that they are starting to clip through his face a little bit there. If we change our alpha sorting to accurate per pixel, it no longer clips. And it is how it's supposed to look. He doesn't look like a friggin' monster anymore. Look at that. Crazy. Now again, this is much more demanding than the other method, but it's the only way to get accurate graphics to render. Next up is GD-ROM loading speed. You can change this to on. It will break something, so I recommend leaving it off. Then there's the widescreen hack. So you can turn this on and restart your game, and it will implement a hacked form of widescreen. There will be object culling. It'll look funky on the sides of the screen outside of the 4:3 frame. But then you can actually load up some widescreen cheats that people have made to help counteract some of those issues. So this is actually pretty cool to mess around with. Next up is cable type. By default, it has it set to composite. You could go ahead and change this over to RGB or VGA RGB. Just note if you have the VGA cable selected, some games won't boot. It'll say it's the wrong cable type and make you change this back over to one of the TV options. On the other hand, there's some games that won't boot unless you have VGA selected, like Unreal Tournament. So thankfully, the vast majority of the Dreamcast library does support the VGA cable. Next up, you can configure your analog stick dead zones. If you feel like your controller isn't working right, you can mess around with this and see if you can get something that feels better to you. Next up, we have filtering. You can go ahead and crank this up to 16 if you want. Then there's the PowerVR2 post-processing filter. If you want to try to mimic the console more accurately, you can go ahead and turn this on. Then there's texture upscaling, so you can go up to 6 times on that. So if you upscale the game, you want to upscale the textures with it. Next up is the HD texture packs. You can load HD texture packs or even dump the textures to make your own HD texture pack directly from Retroarch now. This next option is really cool. It is per game VMUs. By default, Flycast will make 4 VMU files, and then that's shared between every game. If you don't have a lot of Dreamcast games, that works great. You have 4 files, 4 VMUs, that's a ton of save space, but if you have a crap ton of Dreamcast games, those VMUs might get full. So you can click on this and change it to VMU A1, so the very first VMU in your controller one. Every game will have its own A1 VMU, and then the other 3 will be shared across every game. So this is really great if there's games that can take advantage of having save files from other games. You can go ahead and have a single VMU for every single game in A1, and then you can transfer those saves to the other 3 VMUs to be used in games that can take advantage of them. But this is just a great way to ensure that you won't run out of space. Speaking of VMUs, go ahead and click on this Show VMU Display options here. Press F1 to come back in. Now when we scroll to the bottom, there are VMU display options, so you can actually have your VMU pop up on your screen. I like having this. I like this option so much. But there it is, up in the top left corner. You can see the Shenmue VMU right there. And then you can change its position and its size. And then what color it is as well. And then if you want to have the other 4 VMUs on your screen, you can have those pop up as well. Now the last options is the light gun settings, so you're going to have to click this on, exit out of the quick menu and come back in again. And then you can change whether or not your light gun will have crosshairs as you're using it with your mouse. And that pretty much does it as far as Dreamcast emulation is concerned in Flycast. Now you know how to get your core downloaded, BIOS installed, control options, multi-disc game options, and a number of the included core options. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comment section below. I will do my best to try to help you out. I'm not going to claim that I know everything, but I will try my hardest to help you out. Thank you so very much for watching these tutorials. I can't express enough gratitude to each of you for doing so. It really helps out in the growth of the channel, and again, I just can't express enough thank yous for that. So thank you once again. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit that sub button, that like dislike button, just depending how much you like today's tutorial. And if you'd like to further help support the channel, you can check out that join button here on YouTube or check out my Patreon link in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. As always, I am just grateful for your consideration, and for everyone that has already done so, thank you so very much for your insane generosity. You are my freaking champions, and you keep this going. But that's gonna do it for today, so until next time, stay awesome, and we will see you all back next video.